Hi, my name's Erin Cotillo, and I am an instructional coach at Aldridge and Taunton Schools. And today we're going to talk about 5 strategies to help bridge the gaps that we're all seeing in our math classes. Now, I know gaps have always existed. There are always students that really understand the material, and there are always students who fall behind. But over the last few years, teachers have really seen these gaps getting larger and wider. So today, these 5 strategies will hopefully help you. To address that issue with your class and your students. Um, Now, I know some of these things will be strategies that you are already using in your classroom, or maybe you use some of them or you've tried them in the past. Based on my experience, I've worked with kids in kindergarten through 8th grade and teachers of the same grade levels. And people really, when using all of these strategies together, have seen a lot of success. I've seen it myself, I've seen it with my own students, and I've seen it in a lot of different classrooms. So hopefully you will get something from this short tutorial. Let's get started. So just briefly, I'm going to tell you what each of these strategies are, and then I will go into each individual strategy. We start with number sense. The strategy would just be incorporating number sense into your classroom routines, pre-assessing your students to get to know them at a deeper level, specifically with mathematics, using strategy groups in your classroom, and making those very strategic choices about what you're doing in the strategy groups and who's going in each group and how they change, focusing specifically on word problems. That's the fourth one. And then finally, working with fluency, personalizing it, making it meaningful so that your students are all set up for success. So let's jump right into number sense. Now, if you've ever worked with me before, if I've ever been to your classroom, it probably had something to do with number sense. It's something that I've done a lot of work with as a coach back when I was a math coach and as an instructional coach, and it's something I feel very strongly about. Um, Number sense is something that can be incorporated into your math workshop or your math block every single day. It's something that if you're not doing it, you can start tomorrow. It's simple. There isn't a ton of prep work involved, and it's engaging. Kids really love it. So we're just going to talk about why that's important. Um, Students will benefit greatly from quick routines that build understanding of numbers. So I've always liked this really quick illustration of what number sense is, just to kind of talk about why it's so important and what it really is. So if you gave your students a problem, 20 minus 18, like this, you put that on a piece of paper in front of them. If your student says 20 minus 18 is 2, because 18 and 20 are 2 apart on a number line, or 20 minus 18 is 2, if I count up from 18 to 20, it only takes 2, 2 numbers, or, something like that. You know that they have good number sense. They have an understanding of numbers, what the numbers mean, what they are, and how to quickly manipulate them. On the other hand, if your student does this, okay, 0 minus 8, I can't do that. I'm going to cross out the 2, make it a 1. Now I have to make this a 10, or maybe even they forget and they try to make it a 9, because a lot of kids want to do that sometimes. Now 10 minus 8 is 2, and 1 minus 1 is 0. So the answer is 2. Going through all of those steps shows me that that student does not have any number sense or does not have very strong number sense, because they're just thinking about the rules that they learned in school. And our focus and our goal is to try and get our students from the second example to the first example. We want them to be able to look at the numbers, understand what they mean, understand their relationship between each other, which really helps to build their understanding of other and more difficult math concepts. If they memorize a bunch of steps, if they memorize a bunch of rules, that's great for the moment and they may look like they understand something. But then when you build on that concept the following year, most of those kids just completely lose it. So number sense is really important and a really great part of your everyday math routine. So how do you incorporate number sense? There's a couple of different ways. Number sense routines are an easy and quick way to incorporate number sense every day. I will include with this video the slideshow that has links, and you can see a bunch of different number sense routines. The ones that I initially started using were in a book called Number Sense Routines. It's by Jessica Shumway, and it's a fantastic reference book if you're looking for something to kind of bump up your number sense routine and your number sense instruction. So basically what you do is you pick one of these routines, you start your math lesson with it, It can last anywhere between 5 and 15 minutes. It can be a quick conversation. You can be talking about a picture. What do you notice and what do you wonder? There's so many different things that you can do, but the point is to start an engaging mathematical conversation or to get kids thinking. Any of these number sense routines, number talks, problem based learning, we call them low floor, high ceiling activities, which basically means they're accessible to all kids, no matter what range of students you have in your classroom, no matter how low or how big the gaps are. All students can participate. If you're playing how many ways and you're saying how many ways can you make the number 24, or you can have a kid saying 24 plus 0. Then you can have multiple operations. You could do division. There are kids who will take that really, really far and stretch their brains. And then there are kids who will have, some basic answers. But then the second day of that activity, they've now been exposed to all these different ways to make a number. Your kids who were saying 24 plus 0 will now have some more creative ways to make the new number. So you kind of keep building upon the skills, you keep building upon those conversations, and everyone can be a part of it. I found through experience that kids love number sense routines. They're fun, they're engaging, they're fast, and it's a good way to just start your math lesson and get things rolling. And the difference between a number sense routine and a number talk, number sense routines are usually more of a game format. Number talks are more of a conversation format. A number talk could be something really simple. You could give them like 19 times 15 and say, okay, now just show me how you would solve this problem. You could say, show me this problem in two different ways. So just to start up a conversation and to start the math lesson with kids talking about numbers, it's a great way to start, and it's another way to build number sense. And then finally, project or problem-based learning experiences. And these can be designed, or these can be used. There's a great website called Open Middle that has a lot of great like brain teasers and puzzles and projects and problems that you can have students work together in groups or in partnerships to try and figure out. It's a great way to get them talking, to get them thinking. And again, if you're using groups, you can mix them and mix their ability levels, because the types of problems that you're giving them are something that anyone can access. So those are 3 ways that you can incorporate number sense. The next couple of slides will just give you some examples of number sense activities and number sense routines in case you're not familiar. This one is the broken calculator. Basically, you just cover up 2 keys on a picture of a calculator or an actual calculator, because I know there are lots of broken calculators all over this district. So you would just X them out, and then the students would have to be able to figure out what the target number is without using certain keys. You can be strategic about this, or you can just, pick one operation, say you can't use addition, but you have to figure out this number. Today's number is one that I like to use a lot. This example is actually from a 2nd grade class, but you can modify it. I've seen teachers in 5th grade use this in place of calendar math, kind of this number multiplied by today's date. You can turn it into a decimal, you can turn it into a fraction. Lots of different things you can do with today's number. One I want to point out that I really like is, when is it a lot and when is it a little? Because kids can't always conceptualize like what the number actually means. Sometimes, you would think 1,000 is a big number if it was like $1,000. $1,000 might be a little if that was all the money the school had to pay the teachers or something like that. So you have to think about, certain situations and apply that number sense to real life. So again, not only do kids like doing that, but it's a really good way to get them thinking beyond just the numbers on the page. Mystery number or 20 questions is basically just the same as regular 20 questions, except with the number. They really like it. I would just recommend writing down all the questions so that way the kids are able to see. And if this is with 3rd grade, I would also recommend, maybe 4th grade and 5th grade too, recommend giving them a 100 chart or a 200 chart in a dry erase sleeve. So that way they can cross off the numbers as they're eliminated, and it also makes it a little more interactive. So Splat is another great number sense activity. There's a website that I'll link to that has tons and tons of examples that you can use in your classroom again tomorrow if you want to. It's just basically a bunch of dots, and your ink has spilled over them, and we have to figure out how many there are in all. So it's a little bit of subitizing, and it's also a little bit of estimating and making predictions. This one has fractions because you see you have half and half, so that would equal 1 whole, and then this would be the reveal with the number in it. So it's a great quick activity. Like I said, already exists. You can just use it with your class. would you rather math, where you're given two different scenarios and they have to pick which one they would prefer. I've also used this as a project in third grade where the students made up their own would you rather. So again, there's a big list of these activities with links, and I will put that in the presentation for you to look at and use with your class. All right, so the next strategy to help bridge the gaps is pre-assessment. I know pre-assessment is something that a lot of people have been doing for a long period of time, but I also get a lot of questions about pre-assessment and what pre-assessment people should use for math, and is it really effective? I think as far as bridging gaps, this is one of the most effective things that you can do because you see where the gaps are. You can't really plan your small groups. You really can't plan the instruction unless you truly know what your students know and what they don't know. Um, so it's easier to make those groups once you've pre-assessed the students. You can get a really quick look at where the students are based on certain skills, even though you know your students, you know who are the higher students and the lower students, but you don't always know specifically what they are capable of until you actually give them that pre-assessment and let them try. So it really helps to set them up for success, and it helps set you up for success. And even though it's a little extra work in the beginning, it does, make things easier as you go through the teaching. There are many ways that you can pre-assess your students. As a classroom teacher, I've done a lot of them, and there are more than what I've done. I'm sure more than I can even think of. There are lots and lots of ways that you can pre-assess. The most effective for me was always just making my own pre-assessment and only focusing on the skills. So if I was teaching multiplication, I would not give them word problems. I would not give them the Savvis wording. I would just give them maybe an array, like the different forms of multiplication, maybe one problem using the distributive property, one problem just using the standard algorithm. And I would just give them a couple problems that would give me a good idea about how much they knew about the topic. And that way it really helped me to form my groups, not only just for the whole entire topic, but even lesson by lesson. Some kids already understood arrays when I taught third grade because they learned them in second grade. So I didn't really need to go over that. Some students completely missed arrays and had no idea what they were. So I knew that I would have to grab a focus group and really work on that with them. So you can make up your own pre-assessment. I also have used the Savvis or Pearson end of topic tests online. That was an easy way to do it because they come up with a grade right away. It was also a little bit problematic because the kids did not like seeing a very low grade, even though it was not used as a grade. And I would explain that to them. They still really, I think that was a little hit to their confidence. So I kind of stopped doing that, but you could give them the Pearson test. You know, you could also do pre-assessment kind of at the beginning of the lesson using the solve and share. That's a really informal and brief pre-assessment. I wouldn't recommend that to be your only pre-assessment, but that's how I would use the solve and share a lot, where I would just have the students look at it, try their best to solve it, kind of walk around and monitor for the first 5 minutes of, before the mini lesson. And then when I taught the mini lesson, I would give them an exit ticket, and on their way back to their seats, I would kind of just really quickly glance over it and evaluate and see who really got this, who really didn't, and kind of adjust my groups accordingly. However you decide to pre-assess, I think it really is important to know your students really well in order to inform your small groups. And small groups are actually the next topic. I know we all know this is a best practice, strategy groups, small concentrated groups, but I think what happens is a lot of times in the teacher station and math workshop, or when teachers are pulling groups back, they're kind of just repeating the mini lesson, doing the same thing that they did, or just going over the work that the kids did in the book. And yes, those things are important. It's important to make sure they understood the mini lesson. Yes, it's important to make sure that they're getting the work that they're practicing and they're doing. But in those strategy groups, that's a really good time that you can use the data that you got from their pre-assessment and really focus on trying to bridge those gaps. I think a really big thing that you can do is work on prerequisite skills. There is a wonderful website. I'm sure it's been shared with you, but I'll share it again. It's called Achieve the Core. And there's something called a coherence map, where you can look at a skill, a fourth grade skill, say, and then you can look back and see, okay, what are all the prerequisite skills required to understand this fourth grade skill? So what should they have learned in third grade? Sometimes it's a prerequisite skill from second grade, so it skips a grade level. So what should they have learned from second grade? So you can kind of go back and see, these are the things that these kids may have missed who are not understanding the skill, and then you can reteach it. You can also go back and reteach things that you've taught earlier in the school year. For example, if you're teaching division and you see that kids are really struggling in subtraction, you can go back and teach that, or place value. So it could be a really good place to remediate in the small groups. And it does not have to be the same thing that you taught that day. I think a lot of people feel like they have to teach whatever they taught in the mini lesson that day. That's what the small groups have to be, but it really doesn't. We just have to meet them where they are and help them catch up. You could also focus on fluency in the small group. And I wouldn't recommend doing this every single day, but it is something that would be helpful, maybe once a week or every 2 weeks, to meet with strategic groups to work on fluency. I'll talk about fluency a little bit later, but that's also something you can work on in your small groups. You can extend your number sense activity. So if you did a number sense activity and the beginning of your lesson, and you notice that some students really struggled with it, you can kind of bring that skill back up and try to talk about it further with them. You could do a guided math lesson, which is basically kind of like a guided reading lesson where each student works on the same problem. I would usually pick a word problem, or I would pick a more complex problem that will take them 10 minutes, 15 minutes to solve. And then as you go around the group, you sit by each student one at a time. You talk to them, you ask them to explain their process and what they're doing and how they got stuck. So that's a guided math group. You could definitely do that. Or you can go to the enrichment or the reteach pages and or do some kind of activity to enrich the students who need enrichment or to reteach. I wrote not every day on this slide because I think it's important to not just get into a routine of doing that all the time. The reteach pages are great. A lot of times they have a lot of vocabulary for the English language learners, but I think for kids, it's not that engaging, especially if it's done all the time. And just like any resource, they have to be vetted. You have to look through them and see which ones are usable and which ones might not be that valuable. Next strategy is focusing on word problems. And, I've been in a lot of different schools, a lot of different classrooms, and everybody struggles with word problems. They're difficult for kids. And especially I'm seeing this year, a lot of kids have this learned helplessness where they just open to the word problem and then they just raise their hand and say, I don't get it. So strategically teaching them how to solve word problems is definitely a way to help bridge those gaps. A couple ways you can do that. First of all, again, like I said with number sense, incorporating this into your routine is a great way to help bridge some gaps. You can do that in a lot of different ways. If you're doing math workshop, an easy way is just to make one of your workshop stations a word problem station. You can have a problem of the week. You can have a problem of the day. You can use today's challenge. There was a teacher that I worked with that would use today's challenge every single day. And it didn't matter if it was aligned with the lesson that she was teaching. She would just make sure every day to go on to the next. And then she would have the students use the trackpad and they would annotate. And then she would pick a student either at random or based on what she saw when she was walking around. And that student would get to project it. The kids really loved that. That was really exciting for them to be able to show their work to the rest of the class up on the board. That would be great for the iPads and the crayons that you guys just got. A great way to utilize that tool. But working through a word problem, a lot of the times they have charts or graphs. They're very similar to like a standardized test question. So it's that really good practice. And they're not impossible. They're not so difficult that students can't figure them out. And then again, it's just part of your routine every day. If you're teaching them a problem solving strategy, then they can apply that. You can talk about it. You can make that a part of your math talk and your number sense to kind of combine the two. So just putting it into your routine somewhere would be a really great way to incorporate that. I used to do something called Math Forum when I taught Project Goal. And basically, the kids would have to solve a word problem and they would have to type up an explanation. And it was usually lengthy. And then they would send it off to a professor. And then the professor and his, I guess, graduate students would read through and they would make a gold list and a silver list of all the best responses. And I've done that then in my classroom where the kids had to submit on Schoology their explanation for the problem of the week. And then I would post, the two best answers. And again, very engaging, very motivating. And we had a specific routine where we focused on word problems. Another thing that you can do is teach reading strategies for word problems, which sounds kind of strange because they're not the same as stories. They're really, really tiny stories. But if you teach the kids some reading strategies like visualizing the problem, like synthesizing information, like determining importance. If you teach them to really close read the word problem and figure out what it actually means, that's huge in helping them gain more independence and helping them solve problems better on their own. Like I said, there are a lot of gaps in problem solving. There's a lot of struggle with problem solving with students. And by teaching them to really make sense of what's happening in the problem and to really read it closely, you're setting them up for success so that they can work through the problems on their own and not have to rely on a teacher or a parent or somebody to help them. Something else you can do is try to teach perseverance. And again, it's really hard to do that, especially when kids are used to just getting help right away. As a parent and as a teacher, I can say it is so much easier to just help them to the answer and move on with your life. But it's such an important skill for kids to learn, to be able to struggle through a problem and to keep going. I wrote that wait time is an effective strategy where you can just not answer the kid right away. You can say, I see that you're having a hard time, but I need you to work on this a little bit longer and show me that you're trying before I come back and help you. And I know a lot of people do that. And I think that's really a great way to show them that you care and you're not ignoring them, but you want them to try on their own. Something else you can do is something called 3 lives, but every once in a while pulling it out, I think is a great way to help them understand perseverance. Basically, you give them a task, you give them a problem, they're working with a partner, and you put 3 little lines on the bottom of the paper and you tell them these are your 3 lives. So you can ask your partner as many questions as you want, but if you want to ask me a question, I'm going to sign the bottom of the paper or initial the bottom of the paper that I'm going to take away one of your lives. So, like in a video game, you lose when you take out all your 3 lives. So, once they ask 3 questions, they can't ask you any more questions. And I've done this a bunch of times working on perseverance, and kids are very reflective after the fact and say, wow, I can't believe that I really had to think on my own. And I didn't ask you a question, even though I wanted to. And then I figured it out by myself. Like it's a really tangible way for them to see how often they ask questions and to learn that they can rely on themselves. And they can also ask their peers to kind of help them gain that perseverance and that independence. So that's another little mini strategy or idea that you can use. Another thing that you can do is encourage mathematical conversation. There are lots of questions and sentence starters and ideas that I will give you a link to in this presentation that can just help them to go to the next level when you do turn and talks or when you have them working with a partner. A lot of times in math, you ask kids a question, they say the answer, and then you move on to the next one. But engaging in mathematical conversation really just means you have sentence stems, you have ideas of what to talk about once you give the answer. What's a different way you can solve the problem? How did you get to this answer? Is this the only way? How do you know this is right? So just simple things. If they're posted in your classroom near where your other math materials are, the kids will know to look there, and then they have something to go off of instead of just having to turn and talk and not really knowing what to say. So I will link to those as well. The final strategy to help bridge the gaps is focusing on fluency. We all know fluency is important. And I know a lot of people rely on technology. They use extra math or they use reflex or a program like that. Those programs are great, but it's important that you as the teacher really have a good handle on where your kids are with their fluency. One thing that really is effective with fluency practice is personalizing fluency, having kids take some sort of assessment on a regular basis and then only working on the facts that they need to work on. And this can be done in many, many ways. As you know, there are lots of websites, there's lots of, technology tools that you can use to help with fluency. I've also created some tic-tac-toe boards and some activities that kids can do to, practice fluency with a friend, but they're both focusing on their facts. But, keeping it interesting for them and making it personalized will really help them on their journey to become more fluent. So this is just a slide to show some of the examples of things I've done in different classrooms. Right here in the middle is a multiplication check that I did as a Google form. I like doing this because I could make them based on specific fact families that I knew my students needed. And then I would put all of those forms on a website and they would just either scan a QR code or they had the website saved and they could just go and practice They had to time themselves with the timer on the top. You can kind of see it here, but it was a good way for them to continually check in, and I didn't have to keep grading their fluency work. So that was great. I used that in line with the math fluency plan. I gave students, after taking a general multiplication division test, they would then have to create their own fluency plan with my help. I would sit down and confer with them and talk to them about where they would like to see themselves in a month. And we'd work together. We'd, map out how they were going to figure it out. And then they would go from there. And then, like I said, they would keep practicing their fluency. They would keep charting it so they would see their growth. It was really motivational. And then it really did help them to become more fluent with their facts, which in turn helped with all the other operations. And it just made everything a lot easier. Down here is a choice board with some ideas for alternate assignments. I used that when I worked at Ardina, and that was our only homework. We didn't do math homework in the book. The kids just did fluency. So I made a couple of different activities so that the kids would have something different to do to practice their facts. Right here, this is called area fluency. I made this for fifth grade students who were multiplying decimals to give them something a little bit more challenging than just regular multiplication facts. And also I thought it would be good for them to practice in a real world application, something they're going to actually use. Down here, fluency and fitness is something that the math coach created to make fluency a little bit more fun and active for students, either remotely or at home. Basically, to sum it up, we know that there are lots of gaps that have been created or that have always existed, but are just kind of getting a little bit more apparent to us in this current climate. Thank you for the work that you're continuing to do every day with your students. Hopefully, even if you're doing every single one of these 5 strategies, you found something useful in this video, some sort of a tip or a trick or an idea that you can use in your classroom. And again, please feel free to reach out if you would like to see any of these things in action, or if you have any questions. I would love to talk math with you. Have a great day. Bye-bye.